The golden morning. The morning was unusually serene, the kind that painted the skies in shades of amber and pink, making everything beneath it glow. Dominic Johnson and his 9-year-old daughter, Amara, strolled down the cobblestone street of their vibrant community. It was a Saturday morning ritual, one they cherished deeply. Amara, with her cascade of jet-black curls and sparkling brown eyes, skipped ahead, her energy lighting up the otherwise tranquil street. She wore her favorite sunflower yellow dress, the one Dominic bought her for her last birthday. Her joy was infectious, and Dominic, always calm and composed, smiled indulgently at her antics. "Daddy, look at that puppy," Amara exclaimed, pointing at a golden retriever wagging its tail eagerly at a passerby. Dominic chuckled, adjusting his leather jacket. "You've already said hello to 5 dogs this morning. Are you planning to adopt the whole neighborhood?" "Maybe," she giggled, twirling around. Her laughter was a melody that made Dominic's heart swell with pride. Being a single father wasn't always easy, but moments like these reminded him of why he worked so hard to ensure Amara had a happy childhood. Their destination this morning was special, a newly opened toy store that had been the buzz of the community. Amara had been saving her allowance for weeks to buy a doll she had seen in a commercial. Dominic had promised her they'd go as soon as it opened. As they turned the corner, the store came into view. Tinker's Treasures was emblazoned in gold letters above the entrance, and the windows were filled with an array of toys. From stuffed animals to miniature train sets, Amara's face lit up like the 4th of July. "Daddy, it's beautiful," she squealed, tugging at his hand. Dominic grinned. "Then let's go see what treasures await, shall we?" The store was bustling with families, the air alive with chatter and the jingling of bells from the door opening and closing. Amara's eyes darted from shelf to shelf, taking in the kaleidoscope of colors and shades. Dominic followed her closely, enjoying her excitement as she explored. Amara soon spotted the doll section and gasped. "There she is." She pointed to a shelf where a beautifully crafted doll sat. The doll had curly hair like hers and wore a dress adorned with tiny pearls. Amara reached out to take it, her small fingers trembling with excitement. But before she could grab it, a hand intercepted hers. "Excuse me, young lady," a sharp voice said. Amara looked up to see a tall, stern-looking woman wearing a name tag that read, "Margaret, store manager." Her lips were pursed, and her eyes were cold. "Can I help you?" Amara asked politely, her voice steady despite the woman's intimidating demeanor. Margaret frowned. "This isn't a place for people like you," she said, her tone laced with disdain. Amara's brows furrowed in confusion. "People like me?" "Yes," Margaret said, folding her arms. "You don't belong here. We don't need children like you ruining the experience for others." Dominic, who had been browsing a nearby shelf, heard the exchange and froze. He turned just in time to see Margaret pointing toward the door. "Leave now," she ordered. Amara's eyes welled up with tears, but she stood her ground. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice trembling. Margaret scoffed. "It doesn't matter. I won't have you causing trouble in my store." Dominic stepped forward, his towering presence immediately drawing attention. He placed a protective hand on Amara's shoulder and looked Margaret square in the eye. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Margaret hesitated, glancing at the other customers who were now watching the scene unfold. But she quickly regained her composure. "This child was being disruptive," she said, her tone defensive. "I was simply asking her to leave." Dominic's gaze hardened. "Disruptive? My daughter has done nothing but look at a doll she wants to buy with her own money. Is that a crime in your store?" Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The room had fallen silent, and all eyes were on her. Amara looked up at her father, her tears now replaced with a mixture of awe and relief. She had always known Dominic to be her protector, but in this moment, his presence felt larger than life. Margaret's face turned red as she realized the weight of the moment. "Well, she stammered, searching for an excuse. But Dominic didn't wait for her to finish. You've humiliated my daughter in front of everyone. I suggest you find a way to make this right, or I'll ensure that everyone in this community knows exactly how you treat your customers." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Margaret's bravado crumbled. She took a step back, her eyes darting nervously around the room. I didn't mean to offend," she stammered. "Perhaps there was a misunderstanding." Dominic crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "The only misunderstanding here is your belief that you can treat people this way without consequences." Margaret looked as though she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. I'm sorry," she muttered, barely audible. "Apologize to her," Dominic said, nodding toward Amara. Margaret hesitated but then turned to Amara. "I'm sorry," she said stiffly. Amara, still clutching the doll she had picked up during the confrontation, looked at her father for guidance. Dominic nodded, and she replied softly, "Thank you." The tension in the room began to ease as Dominic placed his hand on Amara's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle now. "Let's go pay for your doll." As they approached the counter, the other customers began to clap, their support echoing through the store. Dominic smiled down at Amara, who beamed with pride. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a day that would change their lives forever. The weight of words. The atmosphere outside the store was a stark contrast to the tension that had filled it moments ago. Dominic and Amara walked in silence for a while, the hum of the bustling street around them, a soothing backdrop. Amara clutched her doll tightly, her small fingers gripping it like a lifeline. Dominic glanced at her and noticed the subtle droop in her usually vibrant demeanor. His chest tightened. He knelt down, placing both hands gently on her shoulders. "Amara, are you okay?" She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of confusion and hurt. "Daddy, why didn't she want me there? Did I do something wrong?" Dominic's heart broke at her question. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before he answered. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. What happened and there wasn't about you. It was about her. Some people have small hearts and smaller minds. That's not your fault." Amara nodded slowly, but Dominic could see the question still swirling in her mind. He decided that this was a moment for teaching, not just comforting. "You see," he continued, guiding her to sit on a nearby bench, "people like that manager think they can decide who belongs and who doesn't based on how someone looks, talks, or where they come from. But they're wrong. No one has the right to make you feel small or unworthy. Amara, do you understand?" She nodded again, this time with a bit more confidence. "I understand, Daddy, but it still hurt." "I know it did," he said, pulling her into a hug. "And it's okay to feel hurt. But you are strong, and you are loved. Don't ever let someone's ignorance make you doubt that." Amara leaned into him, her small frame wrapped in his protective embrace. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the unbreakable bond between father and daughter. After a while, Dominic stood, holding out his hand. "How about we grab some ice cream? I hear it's a great cure for bad days." Amara's face lit up at the suggestion. "Can I get 2 scoops?" "2 scoops it is," Dominic said with a smile, his heart lifting at her resilience. As they walked toward the ice cream parlor, Dominic's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and frowned slightly at the name on the screen. It was an old friend, Marcus, who rarely called unless it was something important. "Amara, hold on a second," he said, stepping to the side. He answered the call, keeping an eye on his daughter, as she marveled at a street performer juggling flaming torches. "Marcus, what's up?" Dominic asked. "I just got word about something you need to know," Marcus said, his tone serious. "It's about a certain toy store you just visited." Dominic's brow furrowed. "How do you know about that?" "News travels fast, my friend," Marcus replied. "One of my contacts was there and saw the whole thing. Apparently, this isn't the first time that manager has pulled something like this. But here's the kicker. She doesn't know who you are, does she?" Dominic sighed, running a hand through his short cropped hair. "No, and I didn't see a reason to tell her. Marcus chuckled. Well, you might want to reconsider. The store's owner is someone you've worked with before, a certain Mr. Thornton. He'd be very interested to know how his manager is running things. Dominic's jaw tightened. He hadn't thought about his connections in the heat of the moment, but now that Marcus mentioned it, he realized he had more leverage than he initially thought. Thanks for the heads up, Marcus, Dominic said. I'll handle it. Always a pleasure, Dom. Keep me posted, Marcus replied before hanging up. Dominic slipped his phone back into his pocket, his mind racing. He wasn't one to use his influence lightly, but this situation felt different. It wasn't just about him or Amara. It was about the principal. Daddy? Amara's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see her holding 2 ice cream cones, a mischievous grin on her face. I got one for you, too, she said, holding out the cone with a generous scoop of chocolate. Dominic chuckled, accepting the ice cream. Thanks, sweetheart. Let's sit down and enjoy these. As they ate, Dominic's mind settled. He knew what he had to do. The manager's behavior couldn't go unchecked, not for Amara's sake, and not for the sake of others who might face the same treatment. Once they finished their ice cream, Dominic stood and took Amara's hand. How about we make one more stop before heading home? Where to? She asked, her curiosity piqued. You'll see, he said with a smile. They walked back toward the toy store, but instead of entering, Dominic guided Amara around to a side entrance marked Employees Only. He knocked firmly, and after a few moments, the door opened to reveal a man in a suit. Mr. Johnson? The man asked, his eyes widening in recognition. That's right, Dominic said. I need to speak with Mr. Thornton. It's urgent. The man nodded quickly. Of course. Right this way. As they were led through the store, Amara looked up at her father, her eyes wide with wonder. Daddy, do you know the owner? Dominic smiled down at her. I do. And we're going to have a little chat about what happened today. They were ushered into a spacious office where a distinguished-looking man sat behind a large oak desk. He stood as they entered, his face breaking into a warm smile. Dominic, it's been too long, Mr. Thornton said, extending his hand. Dominic shook it firmly. It has. But I wish this visit was under better circumstances. Thornton's smile faded as he gestured for them to sit. What happened? Dominic recounted the events of the morning, sparing no detail. Thornton listened intently, his expression growing darker with every word. When Dominic finished, there was a long silence. This is unacceptable, Thornton finally said, his voice low and measured. I had no idea Margaret was behaving this way. Rest assured, this will be addressed immediately. I appreciate that, Dominic said. But more than an apology, I want to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. No child should be made to feel the way my daughter did today. Thornton nodded solemnly. You have my word, Dominic. Changes will be made. As they left the office, Amara looked up at her father, her face glowing with admiration. Daddy, you're amazing. Dominic smiled, squeezing her hand. No, sweetheart, you're amazing. And don't you ever forget it. Little did they know, this was just the first ripple in a wave of change that was about to sweep through their community. The ripple effect. The afternoon sun hung high, casting long shadows as Dominic and Amara strolled through the park on their way home. The meeting with Mr. Thornton had gone better than expected, but Dominic knew that words, even those spoken with conviction, weren't enough to bring about real change. Actions would have to follow, and he had every intention of ensuring they did. Daddy, Amara said, tugging at his hand, do you think that lady at the store will be nicer now? Dominic looked down at her, her innocent question cutting straight to his heart. I hope so, sweetheart. But it's not just about being nice. People like her need to learn that everyone deserves respect, no matter what they look like. Amara nodded thoughtfully. Maybe if she played with her toys more, she'd be happier. Dominic chuckled at her simple yet profound observation. You might be right about that. As they approached their neighborhood, a familiar voice called out to them. Dom. Hey, Dom. It was Marcus, the same friend who had called earlier. He was leaning against his car, a sleek black sedan that gleamed in the sunlight. He waved them over with a grin. Uncle Marcus, Amara squealed, running ahead to hug him. Marcus lifted her up and spun her around, laughing. Hey, princess, how's my favorite girl? She's good, Dominic interjected, catching up to them. What brings you here? Marcus set Amara down and crossed his arms, his expression turning serious. I thought I'd swing by and check on you too. I heard about the scene at the toy store. You all right? We're fine, Dominic said, glancing at Amara, who was now playing with her new doll on a nearby bench. But it's not something I'm letting slide. I had a meeting with Thornton earlier. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And, what'd he say? He's taking it seriously, Dominic replied. But I'm not stopping there. This isn't just about us. That manager's behavior is part of a bigger problem. Marcus nodded slowly. You're thinking of making some waves, huh? You know me, Dominic said with a smirk. I don't do half measures. Marcus laughed. All right, I'm in. What's the plan? Dominic's eyes sparkled with determination. We start by bringing the community together. If this happened to us, it's probably happened to others. We need to hear their stories and make sure their voices are heard. Sounds like a rally, Marcus said, his tone approving. You've always had a way with people. They'll listen to you. Not just me, Dominic corrected. It's about all of us. If we stand together, we can make sure businesses like that toy store know we won't tolerate discrimination. Amara ran back over at that moment, holding up her doll. Look, Uncle Marcus. Her name is Layla. That's a beautiful name, Marcus said with a warm smile. Just like you. Amara beamed and then turned to her father. Daddy, can Layla come to the rally too? Dominic crouched down to her level, his heart swelling with pride at her enthusiasm. Of course she can, sweetheart. She'll be our special guest. Over the next few days, Dominic and Marcus worked tirelessly to organize the event. They reached out to friends, neighbors, and local organizations, spreading the word through social media and community boards. The response was overwhelming. Stories began pouring in from people who had faced similar experiences, each one a testament to the need for change. The rally was set to take place in the town square, a central location that symbolized unity and community. As the day approached, Dominic felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He knew the stakes were high, but he also knew they were on the right side of history. On the morning of the rally, Amara stood in front of the mirror, carefully brushing Layla's hair. She had insisted on dressing her doll in a miniature version of her own outfit, a bright blue dress with a matching bow. Are you ready, Daddy? She asked as Dominic adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror. I'm ready, he said with a smile. And you, Miss Amara, are you ready to change the world? She giggled. Me and Layla are ready. When they arrived at the square, Dominic was taken aback by the sight before him. Hundreds of people had gathered, holding signs with messages of unity and justice. There were families, young children, and even some elderly residents who had come to show their support. Wow, Amara whispered, her eyes wide. Look at all the people. Dominic placed a hand on her shoulder. This is what happens when people come together, Amara. This is how we make a difference. As the rally began, Dominic stepped onto the makeshift stage, the microphone in his hand feeling heavier than usual. He scanned the crowd, taking in the faces of those who had come to stand for something greater than themselves. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice steady despite the emotions bubbling beneath the surface. We're here because we believe in the simple truth that everyone deserves respect. We're here to say that discrimination, in any form, has no place in our community. The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy palpable. Dominic continued, sharing the story of what had happened at the toy store. He spoke not just as a father, but as a member of a community that refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. As he spoke, he noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Mr. Thornton, standing near the back, his expression unreadable. Dominic locked eyes with him briefly, silently acknowledging his presence before continuing. By the time he finished, the crowd was buzzing with a sense of purpose. Marcus took the stage next, followed by several other speakers who shared their own experiences and hopes for the future. Amara, sitting on the edge of the stage with Layla in her lap, watched her father with awe. To her, he wasn't just her daddy. He was a superhero, standing tall and fighting for what was right. When the rally ended, Dominic stepped down from the stage, his heart full. People approached him, thanking him for his courage and commitment. Amara clung to his hand, basking in the glow of the moment. As they made their way through the crowd, Mr. Thornton approached them, his demeanor humble. "Dominic," he said, extending his hand, "you've opened my eyes today. I've already taken steps to ensure that what happened to Amara will never happen in my store again, and I'd like to offer my personal apology." Dominic shook his hand, his grip firm. "Thank you, Thornton. But this is just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do." Thornton nodded. "And I'll be there to help." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Dominic looked down at Amara. She smiled up at him, her heart full of pride. "You did it, Daddy," she said softly. "No, sweetheart," he replied, lifting her into his arms. "We did it." And as they walked home that evening, Dominic knew that the ripple they had started would grow into a wave of change that would shape the future for generations to come. The backlash. The rally had been a success beyond Dominic's expectations. The town square had been alive with voices demanding change, united in their stance against injustice. Yet, as the echoes of cheers faded into the night, Dominic knew that change was rarely linear. For every step forward, there were often forces that sought to drag progress back. The first sign of resistance came the very next morning. Dominic was seated at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee while Amara colored a picture of the rally. She was carefully sketching the stage with stick figures of herself and her father at the center. "Daddy, do you think we'll have another rally?" she asked without looking up. "Maybe," Dominic said, smiling. "But for now, let's see how the first one helps." His phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting the moment. He glanced at the screen and saw Marcus's name. "Morning, Marcus," Dominic said as he picked up the call. "Morning. More like battle stations," Marcus replied, his tone urgent. "Have you seen the news?" Dominic frowned. "No. What's going on?" "There's an article circulating online. The toy store manager, Margaret, gave an interview, and it's not good." Dominic's stomach sank. "What did she say?" "She's playing the victim," Marcus explained. "Claims she's being unfairly targeted and that your rally was a personal attack. She's even accusing you of using your influence to ruin her career." Dominic ran a hand over his face, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "That's ridiculous. Everything we did was about accountability and respect, not revenge." "I know," Marcus said, "but she's doubling down. And she's got some people buying her story. Social media's already buzzing with mixed reactions." Dominic hung up and immediately searched for the article. It didn't take long to find. The headline read, "Toy Store Manager Speaks Out. Claims of Discrimination Are Baseless." The article painted Margaret as a misunderstood businesswoman who had been unjustly vilified. It conveniently omitted key details, including the fact that multiple customers had come forward with similar complaints. Dominic scrolled through the comments section. Some people were voicing support for the rally, but others were siding with Margaret, accusing Dominic of overreacting and pulling the race card. He closed the article, his jaw clenched. Amara looked up from her drawing, sensing his unease. "What's wrong, Daddy?" "Just some grown-up stuff, sweetheart," he said, forcing a smile. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Dominic couldn't shake the weight of the situation. The rally had been a beacon of hope, but this backlash threatened to undermine everything they had accomplished. The meeting. That evening, Dominic gathered a small group of trusted friends and community leaders at his home. Marcus was the first to arrive, carrying a stack of printed articles and social media screenshots. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said as he spread the papers across the table. "She's trying to control the narrative." "I figured as much," Dominic said, scanning the documents. Soon, others arrived, including Clara, a local teacher who had spoken at the rally, and Samuel, a small business owner who had faced similar challenges in his store. Clara spoke first. "Dominic, this isn't just about Margaret. There are people out there who don't want to see change. They're using her story as a way to discredit the movement." Samuel nodded. "We need to counter this with facts. People need to hear the truth, not just her version of events." Dominic listened carefully, his mind racing. "So, what's the best way to do that?" Marcus tapped his phone. "We use the same tools they're using. Social media, local news, community events. But we focus on the bigger picture. This isn't just about one store or one manager. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels welcome and respected." "Agreed," Dominic said. "But we also need to stay above the fray. No personal attacks, no mudslinging. We stick to the facts and let our actions speak for themselves." The group spent hours strategizing, drafting statements, and planning their next steps. By the end of the night, they had a clear plan. A series of community workshops focused on diversity and inclusion, a follow-up rally featuring testimonials from affected individuals, and a social media campaign highlighting stories of resilience and unity. The counter-narrative. Over the next week, Dominic and his team executed their plan with precision. They launched a hashtag #RespectForAll, which quickly gained traction. People from all walks of life shared their stories of overcoming discrimination and the importance of inclusivity. Clara organized a workshop at the local library, inviting parents and children to participate in activities that celebrated diversity. Amara eagerly joined in, proudly showing off her drawing from the rally. The second rally was even larger than the first. This time, it wasn't just about what had happened to Dominic and Amara. It was about everyone. Speakers from various backgrounds shared their experiences, emphasizing the need for empathy and understanding. Dominic stood on the stage once more, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "We're not here to tear anyone down," he said. "We're here to build something better. For us, for our children, and for the future of this community." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy palpable. A turning point. Meanwhile, Margaret's narrative began to unravel. Investigative journalists uncovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior during her tenure at the store, corroborated by former employees and customers. Her attempts to paint herself as a victim lost credibility, and public opinion shifted. Mr. Thornton, true to his word, implemented new training programs for his staff and publicly apologized for the incident. He even attended one of Clara's workshops, acknowledging that he had a responsibility to lead by example. Dominic watched these developments with a mixture of relief and determination. The fight wasn't over, but progress was being made. One evening, as he tucked Amara into bed, she looked up at him with her big, curious eyes. "Daddy, are the people still being mean about the rally?" "Some are," he admitted, "but a lot of people are starting to understand why it was important." She smiled sleepily. "I think Layla understands. She says it's good to stand up for what's right." Dominic kissed her forehead, his heart full. "Layla's a smart doll, and you're a smart girl." As he turned off the light and closed her door, Dominic felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would still have challenges, but together, they were making a difference, one step at a time. The unexpected ally. The cool breeze of early fall swept through the neighborhood, scattering leaves in shades of orange and red. Dominic was seated at his desk, surrounded by a growing pile of paperwork and articles. His phone buzzed constantly with updates about the community workshops and social media campaigns. Progress was evident, but the backlash still lingered like a stubborn shadow. The latest surprise came in the form of an email. Dominic opened his inbox to find a message with the subject line, "Let's meet. A proposal for real change." The sender was a name he recognized immediately, Margaret Bennett. Dominic's brow furrowed as he read the email. Margaret claimed she wanted to meet privately to discuss a resolution. She wrote that the public discourse had become overwhelming for her and that she wanted to make amends. "Marcus," Dominic said during their next meeting at the community center, holding his phone out to his friend. "Look at this. Margaret wants to talk." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Talk? After everything she's said and done? Sounds like damage control to me." "Maybe," Dominic agreed, "but I think I should hear her out. If there's a chance to turn an enemy into an ally, it's worth considering." "You're a better man than me," Marcus muttered. "But all right, just be careful." The meeting. The next day, Dominic arranged to meet Margaret at a local cafe. It was a neutral public space where he could gauge her intentions without feeling cornered. He arrived early, choosing a table near the window where he could watch the street outside. Margaret arrived a few minutes later, looking visibly different from the confident, combative woman he'd seen in interviews. She seemed smaller, her shoulders hunched, and her expression wary. "Mr. Johnson," she said as she approached the table. "Margaret," Dominic replied, standing briefly before sitting again. They exchanged polite greetings, and Dominic waited for her to speak first. She fiddled with the edge of her sleeve, avoiding eye contact for a moment before finally looking up. "I wanted to apologize," she began, her voice low. "Not just for what happened at the store, but for how I handled everything afterward." Dominic studied her carefully. "Why now? You've had plenty of opportunities to do the right thing." She sighed. "I thought I was protecting myself, my career, my reputation. But the more I tried to spin the story, the worse it got. And then the truth came out. About the other complaints, the way I ran the store. It was a wake-up call." Dominic leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So, what do you want from me?" "I want to make things right," Margaret said earnestly. "I've resigned from the store. It was the least I could do after everything. But I want to do more. I want to help with your movement, if you'll let me." Dominic's eyebrows shot up. "Help? After the damage you've done?" "I know I don't deserve your trust," she admitted. "But I've been doing a lot of soul-searching. I realize that I've spent my whole life ignoring the privileges I have and the harm I've caused. I want to change, and I want to be part of the solution." Her words hung in the air, a fragile offering of redemption. Dominic tapped his fingers on the table, weighing her sincerity. "You realize, this isn't about clearing your name. If you join this movement, it's about the work, about listening, learning, and being willing to face uncomfortable truths." "I understand," Margaret said. "And I'm ready." Dominic nodded slowly. "All right, but you'll need to prove yourself, not just to me, but to the entire community." A new chapter. Margaret's involvement was met with mixed reactions. Some people welcomed her willingness to change, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether her intentions were genuine. Dominic introduced her to the team at their next meeting. Margaret sat quietly at first, listening as Clara and Marcus outlined the plans for the next series of workshops and events. When it was her turn to speak, Margaret stood, her hands trembling slightly. "I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to see here," she began. "And I don't blame you. But I'm here because I want to learn and to help. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to doing the work." The room was silent for a moment before Clara spoke. "Change starts with acknowledgement," she said. "Let's see what you're willing to do." Over the next few weeks, Margaret threw herself into the work. She attended every workshop, volunteered at community events, and even helped Marcus organize a fundraiser to support local schools in underserved neighborhoods. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, Clara pulled Dominic aside. "I think she's serious," she said. "She's putting in the effort, and people are starting to notice." Dominic nodded. "It's a start, but trust takes time." Facing the community. The true test came when Margaret agreed to speak at the next rally. Dominic had been hesitant at first, but she insisted. "If I'm going to help, I need to own my mistakes publicly," she said. The rally was held at the same town square as before, but this time, the crowd was even larger. Margaret stood on the stage, her hands gripping the microphone tightly. "I'm not here to defend myself," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "I'm here to admit that I was wrong. Not just in how I treated Dominic and his daughter, but in the way I've lived my life. Ignoring the experiences of others and failing to see my own biases." She paused, scanning the crowd. "I know that words alone aren't enough, but I want to use this moment to say that I'm committed to being better and to making amends, not just with Dominic, but with everyone I've hurt." The crowd was silent for a moment before a smattering of applause broke out, growing louder until it became a wave of support. Dominic watched from the side of the stage, his heart conflicted but hopeful. He had always believed in the power of redemption, but seeing it unfold in real time was something else entirely. As Margaret stepped down, Dominic approached her. "That took courage," he said. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for giving me the chance." A ripple becomes a wave. Margaret's transformation became a symbol of what the movement was about, not just holding people accountable, but giving them the tools and opportunities to change. Her story inspired others to examine their own biases and take action. The community grew stronger, united by a shared commitment to justice and respect. Businesses implemented new policies, schools introduced diversity training, and neighbors forged connections that transcended race and background. One evening, as Dominic and Amara walked through the neighborhood, she looked up at him with a smile. "Daddy, do you think the world is getting better?" He looked down at her, his heart full of hope. "I think we're making it better, one step at a time." And in that moment, Dominic knew that their fight had been worth it, not just for their family, but for the future they were building together. A test of trust. In the days following Margaret's speech, the community began to stir with cautious optimism. Some saw her actions as sincere, a sign that people could change when given the opportunity. Others were less forgiving, holding fast to their skepticism. Dominic, ever the pragmatist, knew that progress wasn't about unanimous agreement but about consistent action. Margaret was proving herself, step by step. She volunteered at food drives, joined a committee organizing events to promote cultural understanding, and began attending local book clubs that focused on social justice literature. But despite her efforts, she still faced icy glares and whispered comments when walking through town. One particularly tense moment occurred at the toy store itself. Dominic had been working with Mr. Thornton to transform the store into a beacon of inclusivity, and Margaret had joined the initiative. They organized an event called A Toy for Every Story, an open house featuring toys, books, and games representing diverse cultures and experiences. Margaret walked into the store early that morning, carrying boxes of books and decorations. The new assistant manager, a young black woman named Simone, greeted her with a curt nod. "I'll take those," Simone said, grabbing one of the boxes. "Thank you," Margaret replied, her voice soft. Simone paused, her expression hard. "I'm only doing this for the community, not for you." Margaret's face fell, but she nodded. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness, Simone. I'm just here to help." Simone hesitated, studying Margaret for a moment before turning away. "We'll see," she muttered. The day of the event. When the day of the event arrived, the store buzzed with excitement. Families crowded the aisles, exploring the new selection of toys and books. Dominic and Amara arrived early, eager to see the changes firsthand. "Look, Daddy," Amara exclaimed, pointing to a table stacked with dolls of different ethnicities and abilities. "There's one that looks like me." Dominic smiled. "That's the idea, sweetheart. As they walked through the store, Dominic noticed Margaret standing near the back, assisting a mother and her son. The boy, a shy child with dark brown curls, was clutching a toy car. "Would you like to see the matching racetrack?" Margaret asked gently. The boy nodded, and Margaret led them to another aisle, her demeanor warm and patient. Dominic observed from a distance, nodding to himself. A sudden disruption. Just as the event seemed to be winding down, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A man, red-faced and shouting, stormed into the store. "This is outrageous," he bellowed, pointing at a poster advertising the event. "You're turning this place into some political circus." Dominic stepped forward, placing himself between the man and the families nearby. "Sir, this is a community event meant to celebrate diversity. If you have concerns, let's discuss them calmly." The man sneered. "Oh, it's you, the so-called hero of this town." He turned to the crowd. "This is what happens when you let people like him take over, ruining traditions, pushing their agenda." Before Dominic could respond, Margaret stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were fierce. "This isn't about ruining traditions," she said. "It's about expanding them to include everyone. This store was built to bring joy to children, not to exclude them." The man turned on her. "And who are you to lecture me?" "I'm someone who made mistakes," Margaret said firmly. "But I'm also someone who's learning, and I won't let hate undo the progress we're making here." The man opened his mouth to retort but was drowned out by applause from the crowd. Parents, children, and community members stood united, their clapping a powerful rebuke to his anger. The man glared at Margaret, then at Dominic, before storming out of the store. A new beginning. As the applause died down, Dominic turned to Margaret. "That was brave." She shrugged, her cheeks flushed. It was the right thing to do. Simone approached them, her expression softer than before. "You handled that well," she said to Margaret. "Thank you," Margaret replied. Simone hesitated before extending a hand. Maybe we can work together on the next event." Margaret's face lit up as she shook Simone's hand. "I'd like that." The ripple effect. The success of the event marked a turning point, not just for Margaret, but for the entire community. It became clear that change wasn't about perfection, but about persistence. People began to see Margaret not as the villain she once was, but as someone striving to be better. Dominic watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. He had always believed that progress required both accountability and grace, and Margaret's journey was proof of that. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Amara, she looked up at him with her big, curious eyes. "Daddy," she asked, "do you think Ms. Margaret is our friend now?" Dominic thought for a moment before answering. "I think she's someone who's trying to be better. And that's a good place to start." Amara smiled and leaned against him, her faith in the world unwavering. And in that moment, Dominic knew that the seeds they had planted were beginning to grow, nurturing a future where justice, compassion, and unity could thrive. A legacy forged in change. The autumn sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets of the town. It had been a year since the rally, and Dominic Johnson stood at the entrance of a new chapter. His efforts to bring justice, inclusion, and empathy had ignited a movement that rippled through the community, transforming not only the way people interacted with each other, but the very culture of the town itself. Dominic stood on the steps of City Hall, looking out over the crowd that had gathered for the grand unveiling of a project he had poured his heart and soul into, the Community Unity Center. It was a place designed for all, where children, families, and people of all backgrounds could come together to learn, celebrate, and grow. A place where the values of the rally, the values of justice, respect, and love, would be taught, nurtured, and passed down to future generations. Behind him, a banner stretched across the building's facade, proudly reading "Unity through Diversity, a future without boundaries." The words seemed to glow in the late afternoon light, a testament to the hard work of countless individuals. It had been a long road to get here, The opening of the center was a culmination of the efforts that had begun with the incident at the toy store, the protests, the workshops, and the long conversations that had followed. It wasn't just about changing minds. It was about creating a tangible space for the community to embrace its differences and come together. As the crowd gathered, Dominic's thoughts drifted back to the moment when he and Amara had first walked through that toy store, when their world had been shattered by Margaret's harsh words. How far they had come since then. How much had changed. A moment of reflection. "Daddy," Amara's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to find his daughter standing beside him, a nervous smile on her face. Her hair was neatly tied in a ponytail, and she wore a dress in the same powder blue she had worn on the morning of the rally, the dress that had become a symbol of that pivotal day. "Are you ready?" she asked. Dominic smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I think so. But you look like you're the one who should be making the speech today." Amara giggled. "Maybe one day," she said, her eyes sparkling. They walked together toward the podium, where Marcus, Clara, and several other community leaders were waiting. The crowd cheered as they approached, and the applause grew louder when Margaret stepped forward, joining them at the front. It had been a full-circle moment for Margaret. The woman who had once been the face of exclusion had become one of the center's most vocal advocates. She had spent the past year working alongside Dominic and others, helping organize the workshops, mentoring young people, and sharing her own journey of growth. Margaret's presence now represented the very essence of redemption, a tangible reminder that change was possible if people were willing to take responsibility for their actions and commit to doing better. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today," Dominic said into the microphone, his voice calm but full of conviction. "This center is not just a building. It is a symbol of our shared journey, of how, when we come together, we can overcome division, celebrate our differences, and create a future that is brighter for all." The crowd erupted into applause once more. Dominic looked out at the faces, familiar and new. Some were people who had been with him from the beginning, others who had only recently joined the movement. But they all shared something important, a commitment to a better future. Margaret stepped forward to join him at the podium. Her expression was serene, but her eyes carried the weight of the journey she had made. She spoke softly but with sincerity, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "I used to think that I could only change my own life, but through the work we've done here, I've learned that it's never just about one person. It's about all of us, our children, our neighbors, our friends. This center stands as proof that we can all be a part of something bigger, that no matter where we start, we can always grow." Her words were met with another round of applause. As the crowd cheered, Dominic found his gaze falling on Amara once more. She was standing with Clara, watching the ceremony with a quiet sense of pride, her smile radiating the same warmth and joy that had lit up her face on the morning of the rally. Building bridges, not walls. The Unity Center quickly became a central hub for the community. It wasn't just a space for education or workshops. It was a living, breathing testament to the idea that inclusion didn't have to be a lofty ideal. It could be practical, tangible, and accessible. Over the following months, the center hosted cultural celebrations, dialogues between different communities, and collaborative art projects. It became a place where children learned not just math and science, but empathy, respect, and the power of their voices. Dominic and Amara returned often, sometimes to volunteer, other times just to observe the change taking place around them. One evening, Dominic watched as Amara stood in front of a group of children, explaining the importance of kindness and fairness, using a story from her own life as an example. She spoke with the same clarity and passion that had once belonged only to her father. Dominic realized that the legacy of this movement was not just about the adults who had fought for change. It was about the children who would grow up in a world that understood, at its core, the value of love and respect for all people. The new generation, like Amara, would carry forward the lessons of the past and build upon them. Margaret's work in the center continued to be a source of inspiration. She helped coordinate mentorship programs where people who had been affected by discrimination could share their stories and guide others through their own journeys of growth. Her openness about her own transformation served as a powerful example, reminding others that change wasn't a destination, it was a process. The legacy of a movement. As the months passed, the town became a model for other communities across the country. The success of the Unity Center was shared in articles, documentaries, and online forums, inspiring other towns and cities to take action in their own ways. There were those who argued that such efforts were too idealistic, too slow, or too costly. But Dominic knew better. Change was never easy, but it was always worth fighting for. One afternoon, while Dominic and Amara walked through the park near their home, Amara asked a question that had been lingering in her mind. "Daddy," she began, "do you think people will ever stop fighting?" Dominic took a deep breath, looking around at the peaceful surroundings. The sun was setting, casting the world in a soft golden hue. "People will always have differences," he said, "but the real question is whether we can learn to respect those differences. And if we can do that, we can live in a world where fighting isn't the answer, where we use our voices for understanding instead of division." Amara nodded, her hand slipping into his. "I think we can," she said, her voice filled with conviction. Dominic smiled, his heart full. As they walked down the path, side by side, he knew that the future they had fought for, the one that had seemed so distant, was no longer a distant dream. It was their reality. And it was a reality that would continue to grow, evolve, and thrive for generations to come.